It happened. I knew it was going to. I knew someday I'd get criticized for the way that I dress. And I know I wear the same clothes all the time and never look any different. There's some reasons for that. A lady this morning said, I think you need to get some new shirts. First Samuel 16:6. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before me. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, which also would have shirts in there. But the Lord looks at the heart. And so I will proudly say that I gladly join the ranks of preachers who are not known for being gussied up. And I've never been known for that. Now, there's some of us, I meant to mention this at my last slide, there's some of us that can wear a tuxedo and look like we're going out to work on a motorcycle. That's me. And there's some guys like Mike that can wear old greasy coveralls and look like $1 million. It's just a difference in people. Here's a man, a preacher, who was identified by what he wore, and it wasn't fit to wear to church. The king asked him, what kind of a man was it who came to meet you and told you this? And this man was Ahaziah, son of Ahab, and so he had just kind of against his will, he's going to talk to Elijah. Sent some men out, and they come back, and they met somebody that told him to go back. He said, your king is going to die. He had taken a serious fall. And they replied he was a man with a garment of hair and a leather belt around his waist. I could be worse. The king said that was Elijah the Tishbite. And that is our introduction tonight. Would you like to know who the lady was that said that? It was not Megan, no. It was Jan. She just said, you need to get some new shirts. So I'm going to get some new shirts. Tonight we're going to talk about feeling lonely. And I thought for quite a while about how to word this. And, is it loneliness or feeling lonely or being alone? And I decided to go with feeling lonely because that's what it usually is. And for Christians, that's what it always is because we are never alone. It's a song we used to sing many years ago when I lived in Ashland, Ohio, called No Never Alone. Have you ever sung that one? And I looked for it. There are a lot of really good songs that we sang many years ago that aren't even in the books anymore, and that's one of them. And I looked in the songbook and online, and it's just not there. Is it possible to feel alone in a crowd? I think probably quite a few of us here have. Maybe you aren't one of the birds of a feather that sticks together. And what we're going to look at tonight can be kind of unpleasant to talk about and kind of unpleasant to think about. It's something I think we just need to deal with. This was me when I was in elementary school. I milked cows. I didn't play baseball or basketball, and I know this is hard to believe, but I was small and scrawny when I was in elementary school. It's true. Were you ever the last one to be picked? It was awful. They'd be choosing teams up, and I'm standing there, and fortunately there was always one kid that was worse than me, so I was next to the last. It's awful to be unwanted. This actually, we're talking about feeling lonely or feeling alone, and this is probably a lot closer to the truth. This balloon that has all the people thinking the same thing says all these people really seem to have it together, And I still have no idea what's going on. And that happens a lot in the church. I mean, we come to church and we see everybody, and everybody's dressed up and looking good except the preacher. And he's going to when he gets his new shirts. We think, boy, I've had people tell me this. This was years ago, and it wasn't in this church, and it wasn't at Roseville. But I had somebody one time tell me, I just wish our marriage was like theirs. And I had done some marriage counseling with the ones they wished their marriage was like. And of course I couldn't say anything, but I thought, oh, no, you don't. Not at all. They see them at church, and everything looks rosy. Most of us have been there to some extent and for different lengths of time, and some of us kind of live in loneliness or feeling alone. How many of you remember this? The loneliest guy in town, Maytag repairman. His name was Jesse White. He was a comedian, several other things, and he was the Maytag repairman from 1967. That's when they started with these TV commercials until 1989. 22 years of being the loneliest guy in town. You ever heard of Bobby Vinton? I imagine there's some people here that loved Bobby Vinton. You remember him singing Lonely? I'm Mr. Lonely. I have nobody for my own. I'm so lonely. I'm Mr. Lonely. Wish I had someone to call on the phone. And I'm just going to recite this. I won't sing it. If I do that, I'm going to have Mike come up and sing it. Now, and this song was, I think, first produced in 1962. So a lot of us know it had a different meaning when he says, now I'm a soldier, lonely soldier, away from home through no wish of my own. That's why I'm lonely. I'm Mr. Lonely. I wish that I could go back home. Letters. Never a letter. I get no letters in the mail. I've been forgotten. Yes, forgotten. And then he puts it all back on himself. How I wonder, how is it I failed? And that's how our thinking goes, and that's why our feelings of loneliness sometimes are really strong, because we don't quite think right. In 1949, Hank Williams was so lonesome he could cry. You remember that song? This is one of the lines in that song. Did you ever see a robin weep when leaves begin to die? I was going to put some other songs up there too, but I thought, well, I better get on with the text. Did you ever realize how many songs about loneliness there are? The one other one I was really tempted to put up here was Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. Oh, think of all the lonely people. She was picking up the rice at the church where her wedding has been. It wasn't her wedding. There are two people in that song. The other one's Father Mackenzie. I relate to him. Writing the words to a sermon that no one will hear, no one came near. And then when she dies, he's burying her alone, and he wipes his hands of the dirt from the grave, because there wasn't even anybody else there to bury her. No one to save. Think of all the lonely people. Tonight we're going to think about one lonely feeling person. His name was Elijah, and he felt alone, but he wasn't. I thought about this because as I'm reading through the book of Romans in our daily Bible readings, this comes up. He's referred to. Romans 11:2. God did not reject his people whom he foreknew. Don't you know what the scripture says in the passage about Elijah? How he appealed to God against Israel. Lord, they've killed your prophets and torn down your altars. I'm the only one left. And they're trying to kill me. And what was God's answer to him? I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So too at this present time there is a remnant saved by grace. And if by grace, then it's no longer by works. If it were, grace would no longer be grace. And so the answer, the crux of what we're going to look at tonight is no, you're not alone. You might feel it. I'm going to relate one personal story tonight. I'm a kind of a people person type of guy, and wherever I am, I strike up conversations with people. Sometimes they're good, and sometimes I think afterwards, probably shouldn't have said that. I was at the hometown grocer's the other day, and there's a woman standing there at the ice cream freezer. And she's standing at the door. I wanted to open. She's standing there looking and looking, and finally I said, "That voice just kind of calls loud, doesn't it?" But, well, this is one of those times I probably shouldn't have said that. But I like to talk to people, and I don't often feel alone. I had been married for years, had several kids, had moved away from my hometown, and I called my folks one day. My brother Dan and my dad had the same birthday, April 5th. And so that's when I called. It was on a Sunday afternoon. I'd never been homesick, never in my life. I didn't understand at church camp, these kids get so homesick, it was just awful. And I didn't really understand it. And I'm talking to my brother a little bit, and all of a sudden in the background I hear my family singing happy birthday. Oh, man, did it hit. It hurt. And I remember my dad, after they blew the candles out, they had a neighbor, his name was Paul Martin, and he smoked a pipe. My dad had to sing every time we blew candles out on the birthday cake. Paul Martin smoking his old pipe. And he said it. I thought, this is worse. I understand. I know what this is about now. Never had that feeling again, not to that extent. You're not alone. 1 Kings chapter 18, there was a man by the name of Obadiah who hid 100 prophets. And it was during a drought. It hadn't rained for 3.5 years. And he's got 2 caves, 50 prophets in each cave that he's hiding from the rottenest king and queen there ever was in Israel, Ahab and Jezebel. And he waters them, and he feeds them. He cares for these prophets. And I don't think this is the same Obadiah that, I'm sure it isn't, that wrote the book of Obadiah. There was about 10 or 11 Obadiahs in the Bible. Obadiah met with Elijah, talked with Elijah. Elijah knew that Obadiah was not only a faithful prophet, but the tremendous strain he would be under, hiding 100 men that Ahab and Jezebel wanted to kill. Elijah said to him, "I'm the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets." This is on Mount Carmel. And he has a challenge to the prophets of Baal. He said, what we're going to do is we're just going to find out who the true God is, and here's how we're going to do it. You build an altar, you get all these prophets and priests out here, and you have them call on their God for fire to come down from heaven and start that. And it didn't. All the people, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but all the people converted to the true God. They said, the Lord of Israel, he's God. The Lord of Israel, he's God. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate, cried, the Lord, he's God. The Lord, He is God. And Elijah, in the midst of all this, says, and I'm the only one? How could he make a statement like that? Elijah said to all the people, come here to me. They came to him and they repaired the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins, because the Lord's kingdom was in ruins, because the people had followed Baal. They made an altar. They built an altar for Baal, but Elijah repaired the altar of the Lord, had 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel. Calls down fire. They build the altar. They dig a trench around it. They butcher the bull. They put him on top of the altar. Prophets of Baal, he gave them all kinds of time. They started early in the morning. At noon, they're just getting worked up into this awful frenzy. He lets them go until evening. What a show they put on. Cutting themselves, dancing, slinging blood everywhere. Elijah just says, maybe you ought to get louder. Maybe he can't hear you. I know, maybe he's on vacation. Elijah has them find water. I'm not sure where they found it, but they found enough water to come over and douse the sacrifice in the wood and dig a trench around it and fill it up with water. And Elijah says, Lord, will you please light this fire? Boom. Burned up the sacrifice, burned up the wood, burned up the stones, and licked up all the water in the trench. And they all believed. How can somebody know that and think that and say, I'm just all alone here? They killed the 850 prophets of Baal and Asherah. James 5 tells us that Elijah was a man like us. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. And when he made that prayer, his servant was right there with him. How would you feel if you were a servant? Right there beside, Lord, I'm all by myself here. Because sometimes we have feelings of loneliness. After all this happened, Ahab goes back to his wife, tells her everything that happened. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. And you would like to think that Elijah would stand up and say, I don't think so. I don't think Ahab told you everything, or you wouldn't make a statement like that. But Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. His servant's still with him. And Elijah left his servant at Beersheba. How in the world could Elijah say, I'm all alone? Elijah prayed for God to take his life. And fortunately, that prayer wasn't granted. Sometimes people get feeling so alone, desperately alone, that they do take their lives. Elijah was given some food, and then he fasted for 40 days, and he walked all the way down to Mount Horeb, which is the same as Mount Sinai, and he spent the night in a cave. And I was going to put a map in there. I forgot to put it in. When he left Mount Carmel, he ran ahead of Ahab's chariot, ran faster than the horse, and that's probably about 30 miles. That's pretty good. And then from From Jezreel, they went to Jezreel. From Jezreel, he went down to Beersheba. And from Beersheba to Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai, it was about 250 miles, and it took him 40 days to walk that. I guess maybe he had had bypass surgery or something, but it would take me longer than that. Why was it 40 days? Why did he have to travel? He traveled south to Mount Sinai through the desert all by himself, not even anything to eat. And then he turns around and comes back. When he's in the cave, the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? He's there because God called him to go there. It wasn't his idea. He didn't think, I'm going to take a camping trip. There's a good cave down in Mount Sinai. He replied, you still can't let go of this. He's talking to God. I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. He'd already said that. Now he's saying it to God. Sometimes the reason that we have these crippling feelings of loneliness is because we won't let things go. We won't look at things realistically. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And he locked his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? Why would God even ask him that? He's the one that called him down there. Sometimes we just need to reflect. He's just not letting go of this. I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. Why do you think he had to walk all the way to Mount Horeb and go into a cave and come out of the cave when the Lord called him and hear a gentle whisper, what are you doing here? Let me tell you my story, Lord. Everybody's against me. I'm the only person that's faithful to you. Sometimes we just can't let things go. Unfortunately, I understand that pretty well. It's not easy. The Lord said to him, go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. You mean to tell me I walked all the way down here by myself so I could stay in a cave, have you call me out and say, what are you doing here? Turn around and go back. For what? Couldn't you have told me that when I was in Jezreel? Or at least Beersheba? And saved me all this trip? When you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Oh, I did have my map in here. Jezreel, about 25 or 30 miles north, up by the other end of the Sea of Galilee, is Mount Carmel. And that's where he ran faster than horse for probably 30 miles. And then he walked down to Beersheba with his servant. And he left his servant at Beersheba, walked all the way to Mount Sinai. And the Lord said, "What are you doing here?" And he gave him some instructions, some things he wanted him to do. And he says, "Now turn around and go back up to Samaria." Anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah, to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him. How could Elijah say, "I'm all alone? I'm the only one"? And he doesn't just say it to Israel on Mount Carmel. And he gets down and meets God face to face. He tells God. And then it's just like God didn't hear, because he tells him again. Sometimes I think we get the idea that God's just not listening. And I think this is what this episode is all about. I think it was one of those desert experiences. That's a long walk by yourself to turn around and go back. But you see, it's the journey, it's not the destination. God can put anybody where he wants, anytime he wants. Did that with Philip, didn't he? Just kind of put him where he wanted him. Elijah needed time to think, and he needed a lot of time to think. And he needed to get his thinking straight. Needed to recognize that he wasn't alone. Felt like he was. Sometimes we feel like we are desperately alone. But you're not. God says, "I got things for you to do." What are you doing down here, Mount Horeb? Turn around, go back to Samaria. Got several people I want you to anoint. Here's what's going to happen when they're anointed. And I want to close with this text out of the New Testament, because feelings can be overwhelming. Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth. Did you ever help someone and then feel like you got kicked in the teeth because you helped them? I remember this. Wasn't a big deal, but I remember it because it was just a crazy statement. There were some people that, again, this is years and years ago. I preface that quite a bit because I don't want people thinking, "I wonder who it was." Well, you don't know them. My wife does, but you don't. Maybe I'll tell her when we're out shopping for shirts. Sometimes we just have trouble letting things go, don't we? Remember, they just always needed things, and so I took things over and fixed some things for him. And one day his wife says, "You know, the only time John ever comes over here is when he's helping us." I thought, well, okay. Let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and truth. And when we do, whatever our feelings are, even if we feel like we're not being appreciated or getting kicked in the stomach or whatever, this then is how we know we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence whenever our hearts condemn us. Sometimes our hearts can be pretty condemning. Elijah's heart was very condemning. God's greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Man, isn't that the lesson right out of Elijah? God knew everything. It took Elijah 40 days of hiking through the desert, staying in a cave, meeting God and talking to him and telling God his story. And of course God heard it. God listened to it. But God's greater than our hearts. God was greater than the story that Elijah told him about being all alone and never getting any help, nobody else caring. God said, first of all, you don't have a clue how many people are still faithful to me. I know, but you don't. And the ones he knew about, he didn't believe, including the people that repented on Mount Carmel and his faithful servant. But you see, God was greater than that. And he knows everything. And he knew what needed to be done. He knew who Elijah needed to go and anoint and what was going to happen when they were anointed. And Elijah played a key part in all this. You're not alone. God has things for you to do. And sometimes we just have to buck up and say, feelings are feelings. What does God want me to do? This evening, perhaps you're not in Christ. Or perhaps sometimes our feelings get overwhelming. They have for me. And you just wonder what's the use and why isn't anybody else here helping me? And we need to recognize that's my heart. God's greater than my heart. And he knows everything. And I don't, and so I listen to him. If we could assist you any way at all tonight, whether it's being baptized into Christ or maybe repenting and coming back to him, just requesting prayers from this church. We invite you to come forward now and let us know how we can help as we stand and sing.